Hi everybody and welcome to this week's edition of Straight Talk, sponsored by Inglis and Darley. I'm Bren O'Brien and joining me as per usual is Tim Rowe. Today, Yulong makes its Hunter Valley move. What does it mean for the Australian thoroughbred industry? Vinery and Kia Ora join forces, plus size have defied the lack of Group 1 on the track with Group 1 victories from the breeding barn. In racing, Racing Queensland stepped up its training game, Racing Victoria charts a new strategy on race dates, plus the end of the road for one of Australia's pioneering syndicators and catering headaches for the VRC. And in wagering, on-course bookies hit the road, Tabcorp moved to ban punters, plus Bettar's warning on the economy. Tim, straight into it. You've been following this story for a couple of years on Yulong. You've been trying to sort of get the inside run, been talking to a lot of people around Yulong's likely move and now confirmed move to the Hunter Valley. They've secured Segenhoe stud. It's obviously a massive deal in terms of monetary value, but even a bigger one in terms of the consequences or the impacts on the Australian thoroughbred industry.
Yeah, in many ways, it was only a matter of time, and it makes sense. In some ways, you go, oh, gee, we thought it would have happened earlier, and there was certainly suggestions and speculation, well, more than 2 years ago that, Mr. Zhang and Yulong had certainly looked at Segenhoe or made an offer and to Kevin Maloney. Just for whatever reason, it didn't come to fruition at that time, and Kevin and Clint Donovan, who we'll hear from in a minute, sort of through Clint, embarked on a sort of international marketing campaign. I reckon it was probably 23 months ago or so, sort of launched around the same time as Magic Millions national sale. And yeah, as you'll hear from Clint later, he sort of expands on that. But it's just taken that length of time for Yulong to be ready to have the stallions to support a Hunter Valley base, with Alabama Express moving up there and Private Harry retiring. Devil Knight will retire there as well. It's a big move, but not a surprise. And for their broodmare band, they probably, and to be a legitimate stallion business, they probably need a Hunter Valley base with the scale they've got.
Yeah. Tagaloa, Lucky Vega, the other two stallions to go to New South Wales, of course, as well, Tim. What it does do, and probably the thing that you and I probably are well and truly across, because we understand the importance of this from a commercial point of view, it enables them to get best commercial value out of their broodmare band and their stallions because they're in the Hunter. And, there is not that restriction to go to Victoria anymore. And, of course, they'll still be heavily involved in Victoria and stand stallions down there and have broodmares down there and whatever, but it does put them right in the heart of the business. And they have sold more yearlings than any other vendor over the last few years, last couple of years, and that will only get bigger and better. They've got a broodmare band, in excess, I think, 600 to 800 broodmares, Tim. They've obviously got a big stallion roster now. It just puts them in a position to really start to commercially dominate. And so then this doesn't become this notion of, Mr. Zhang's putting hand in the pocket to, fund more things or whatever else. It puts them in a position to really start to get some strong commercial returns, which just, empowers them moving on for, years and years and years to come, and makes them, an absolutely rock solid, foundation of the Australian thoroughbred industry.
And they've bought, a showpiece property that people, buying yearlings off properties that have proven producers is a big variable or factor that yearling the professional market considers, rightly or wrongly. It is a major factor in their decision making, or a significant factor. And they, Segenhoe sits probably arguably right at the top of the tree when it comes to that. A lot of good horses have come off the farm, particularly in recent years, but over a long period of time. I think it was established in 1909. So, and since Kevin's owned the farm and Peter O'Brien's been there since 2013, a lot of good horses, clients, and interestingly, clients or current clients, Segenhoe, are encouraged to keep their mares there if they wish, certainly in the short term and perhaps longer term, which points to a bit more of a outside commercial operation from Mr. Zhang and Yulong as well.
Yeah, and that probably reflects working within the Hunter Valley community now. Where previously they were sort of the biggest show in town in Victoria. They had neighbours, they had people they work with in Victoria. Now, because they're right in the middle of all that, the ability to work with all those people sort of changes things. Tim, where does this put sort of Kevin Maloney? We know obviously his colours, the Segenhoe colours, very well. We obviously know the horses that come off it. We've seen the $1 million yearling graduates. We've seen the Group 1 winning graduates come off that farm. You had a good chat with Kevin this morning, I believe. I mean, where does that put his sort of future investments?
Oh, it's always fascinating talking to Kevin. He's still, as he makes the point, he's thrilled that Mr. Zhang has bought the property because it is, almost like a custodian to carry on the legacy. But Kevin won't be lost. His mares are staying there at Segenhoe for the time being, at least, and he's got, I think, 25 or 30. He's got loads of horses in training with a lot of different trainers, including he's telling me he's got 14 with Tom Charlton and John O'Shea when he comes back, and obviously transatlantic with Tony Gollan, and he's in the Segenhoe or Kevin Maloney colours, red and yellow. So he's not lost to the game. He's sold the property. His kids aren't interested in it, and he does have a lot of other business interests. He's fascinating in that, the Tulla Group, what they have, Gulliver's Travel and different things. If you want to go to rugby union or race meetings or whatever it is, Kevin's involved. He's got a business for it.
Yeah, and he's definitely, having sort of caught up with him a couple of times over the last 12 months, Tim. He's not, he may be moving on a little bit in life, but he's got no intention of going anywhere in terms of his business development. Of course, the other man involved in the middle of all this has been Clint Donovan, and you've been on the phone with Clint a fair bit over the course of the past couple of years, and particularly the last few months, as sort of rumours circled that this deal was set to get done, and memes were circulated with Yulong jets landing in the Hunter Valley and at Scone Airport and all this type of stuff. And I think Clint has been trying to pilot a way through this between two very interesting men that are very, I guess, got strong business commercial sort of mindsets. Yeah, and interesting chat with Clint about sort of how this all worked out, Tim.
Well, yeah, I did sort of apologise to Clint. I have rang him a lot and pestered him, and because there is speculation and rumours, not just about Segenhoe and Yulong, but lots of other different things. He's got grown a significant business pretty quickly in the real estate, particularly horse stud selling business. And I thought he'd lost my number the other day. Excuse me, because he didn't say hello to him. He sort of half wondered who it was, and he admitted that he'd wiped his phone or all his contacts have been connected to a Magic Millions email that he got rid of. So no, he's got my number again, and I continued to pester him the last week or two. And yeah, for his sake, it finally went through yesterday or late yesterday, and a lot of work's gone into that. I'm sure the commission's healthy, but it's a lot of work to get a deal, negotiate a deal like that, and make sure everything's in order.
And here's what Clint had to say about getting the deal done.
Look, it has been something that took a little while to come together. However, it makes complete sense for the sensational Yulong operation that's purely unstoppable, not only in size but quality, and focus on quality, to have a footprint, and not only a footprint, not any footprint, the footprint being what I regard, and I'm sure many agree, as one of the marquee farms in the Australasian landscape.
I think publicly it was sort of launched, maybe 23 months ago, public advertised and things like that. Was there much interest back then from other parties or from various parties, perhaps including Yulong?
Look, there most certainly was, and we went through a raft of inquiries from everywhere from Saudi Arabia to America to domestic. And look, ultimately, we also had a lot of investment firms looking at such a trophy asset in the Australian thoroughbred landscape. The more they dig into, those sort of firms dig into horse studs, probably without too much familiarity from their end, it becomes a bit confusing. So ultimately, the buyer was always going to be someone already with a strong foothold in the industry that wanted to either increase presence or get hold of one of the best farms in the country.
And what was interesting yesterday, also certainly maybe in the short term and possibly the longer term, there, Yulong are encouraging existing Segenhoe clients to sort of keep their mares there, or some of their mares there at least. So it is sort of a public farm, so to speak.
Yeah, it is. And look, that wasn't something I saw coming. It was certainly the wish of the Yulong Investments team and family that current clients and or new clients see it as an opportunity to have their mares now served by stallions, and their yearlings raised on that hallowed ground.
Since you've sort of gone out on your own at Donovan and Co. and established a pretty successful business, you've handled a lot of these sort of equine farms up and down the East Coast. How, and I've spoken to you about this previously, but how many of these are for sale, and how hard is it to find buyers, given the cost of acquiring the asset, and then obviously the upkeep and running a thoroughbred farm is, labour intensive, and obviously the infrastructure required.
Yeah, look, upkeep and staffing are the two main issues, and often why your investment firms or investors might shy away once they do start looking under the bonnet. So, look, I think with all of these land transactions, particularly of significant scale like Segenhoe, it's got to begin with one thing, and that's a passion project for the horse, for the breed, for producing the best horses humanly possible. So the passion or the love for the animal and the industry has to come first and foremost.
We've seen, just yesterday it was announced, Kia Ora sort of merging stallion farm, or merging their sort of stallion roster with Vinery as well. You've got, there's Ridgemont that's on your books as well. Are there other people sniffing around perhaps that we could see the more change coming up with ownership and different things?
Look, I hope everybody agrees with my sentiment on this, but the Yulong investment into the Hunter Valley is a huge coup for New South Wales breeders. It's a huge coup for the Hunter Valley thoroughbred. More mares, more stallions. I think a rising tide lifts all boats. So having Yulong in the Hunter Valley means more horses, as I was saying, which therefore means potential disbursement of stock that are currently on Segenhoe, that some of those owners may choose to look at buying their own farm or shifting to others, and there'll be a bit of a changeover period over the next few months, I would assume, and that most likely will lead into parlays into farms like Ridgemont. That's an immaculate setup owned by the Cunningham family, invested in the farm. The Cunninghams invested like they were never moving it on, and just with a change of circumstances, it's a right turnkey opportunity for a breeder.
And obviously with your long affiliation with Magic Millions as well, understand the game better than most. That as you say, having access to hopefully the stallions that Yulong already have and will have in the future, it's probably no secret that champion stallions are either no longer with us or sort of getting towards the end of their lives. I'm Invincible, and obviously Schnitzel's no longer there. That we're looking for that next batch of good stallions, and Alabama Express is going to head up the roster in Segenhoe.
Yeah, and again, I think it's very exciting for the Hunter Valley that's the case that he's standing there. And look, Yulong's investment, we all know how big it's been, I guess, for the want of a better term. So it does create that great opportunity, I think, for all people, and their success on the racetrack and from their horses they bred is really becoming an outstanding feather in their cap.
Thanks for joining me, Clint. And as I said, I know you put a lot of effort in there, and I've probably annoyed you more than I should have over the last 18 months or so. That potential, you hear rumours all the time this is happening, and until the money's in the bank, which obviously and contract signed, finally went through yesterday, and it's sort of a changing of the guard.
Yeah, it is. And look, I will publicly thank the Maloney family for entrusting Magic Millions and my firm with the transaction. It's been a property that's been very dear to their hearts. They've loved it. Peter O'Brien's been at the helm for 13 to 15 years, I believe, and in that time there's been 18 individual Group 1 winners off the farm. So I'm just delighted for the Maloneys that they can hand over to the new entity, Yulong, who are so heavily invested and passionate about the game. It's a great story all around. And Tim, you touched on the rumours. Yes, there's been a lot of talk for a while, and you are quite right. And as I've said to you multiple times now, until things are signed, then it's not done. But I'm very pleased to announce that it certainly is done and dusted now. We look forward to Yulong's tenure for many years to come.
Thanks very much, Clint.
Thanks, Tim. Cheers.
Yeah, so that news yesterday, Tim, it kind of overshadowed, or it did overshadow what was going on sort of, just down the road with Vinery and Kia Ora confirming, which we kind of believed was going to happen for a while, yet combining their stallion operations. The two existing Kia Ora stallions plus the new stallion Tropicus, the two other ones being, of course, Farnan and Captivant, are now going to be standing at Vinery. The ownership's sort of shared between the two farms now, so it kind of makes sense, but it is a bit of a new era. We saw Kia Ora sort of come into the market, the stallion market, probably 4 or 5 years ago, Tim, now, and now we're in a situation where, Vinery and Kia Ora are operating together.
Yeah, and some will, be sort of less diversification or people involved, but it's, it does make sense even for the bigger players. Scale helps, just the savings on probably marketing, all sorts of different things, pushing the same message from the one farm, and transport and staff is such an issue to try and get, quality staff or staff full stop. So any sort of savings in that regard, labour force and everything, it does make sense. Kia Ora aren't going anywhere. They've still got a very good broodmare band and will be supporting Vinery, their own and outside stallions. And certainly at this stage, the yearling drafts from the Vinery and Kia Ora will be sold separately at the various sales around the country.
Yep. So we probably expect, so we expect that to happen for a while, and that's the aspect of they'll be combined together. Vinery is obviously a brilliantly appointed farm. There's a stallion barn at Kia Ora that was only built a few years ago, Tim. That's quite specky as well. So it's an interesting one from their point of view. What they're doing with that, it make a great function space, I'm sure. But I'm sure the folks at Kia Ora will be working that one out anyway. At the other end of the scale, Tim, I just wanted to sort of point out. Well, I did a story earlier this week about Group One, non-Group One winning sires who turned out to be Group One producers, and the most famous of those is I'm Invincible, Written Tycoon's another one. But we had one on the weekend, which obviously close to my heart and not too far geographically from where I'm currently located. Wordsmith getting GG's Miss Truth, winning the Robert Sangster Stakes, which was an outstanding result in terms of what the gears have put into racing and whatever else. But it is an interesting one. I mean, look through it. It's probably around about 20% of Group 1 winners in Australia. Somewhere between 15 and 20%, depending on what year it is, are by non-Group 1 winning sires, where at the moment it's probably about 55% of size in Australia, they're standing in Australia at a commercial level is sort of that way. So it is interesting how obviously Group 1 winning sires Group 1 winners produce Group 1 winning horses. We've always known that. That's why you pay a premium for a horse. But it's just an interesting little exercise looking at that anyway, and I encourage people to go and have a look at that article. The following segment is brought to you by Darley. Darley Australia has announced its 2026 stallion roster with 16 stallions to stand across Kelvinside in New South Wales and Northwood Park in Victoria. Collectively, they had amassed 43 Group 1 wins, 81 Group wins, 12 champion titles, and 8 race or track records. Two darn hot headlines the star-studded roster. Alongside him is sensational Animo, whose first yearlings set the sales ring alight this year. Former champion European sprinter Harry Angel continues his rise up the stallion ranks. Victoria welcomes the return of Dubawi's highest-rated son in Gayath. Breeders looking for the commercial benefit of first-season stallions have welcomed the recent retirement of Tentaris and Observer to Kelvinside and Northwood Park, respectively. For full details, check out darley.com.au. Tim, a couple other little stories in the racing space now, and we'll start off with Racing Victoria confirming today that what their schedule will look like, or their race calendars will look like for the next 12 months. I'm not too sure you've had a busy morning chasing things up and having a look at this one, but what it does sort of indicate is more and more these race calendars are off to rise around wagering. There's more twilight meetings, which is probably the notable part. Wednesday twilight meetings become more commonplace. Night meetings, we know, develop good turnover. There's obviously the planning around what they're going to do without Moonee Valley and the meetings around there. There's nothing dramatic in that in terms of we didn't know already. Caulfield and Sandown hosting Moir Stakes and the Manikato Stakes, we hold on the day after the grand final this year. So little changes like that. But not surprising we're seeing racing bodies sort of take a very much a wagering lens on these things at a time when we've seen wagering turnover decline over recent years, and there's a real sort of sense of needing to optimise where the money's spent and where the meetings are held, Tim.
And what I took out of it is, you sort of this for as long as Sky channels existed, just the getting access to the clock, I guess, or to Sky One, they've removed some sort of weekend, Saturday and Sunday meetings and put them on Mondays because they get clear air rather than clashing with meetings all around the country, which was quite interesting. That obviously the return on that having sort of almost sole focus, or maybe one other thoroughbred meeting in New South Wales to clash with rather than 6 or 8 meetings around the country. Obviously the wagering numbers stack up, and at the moment where the economy is doing it tough and people have got less money to punt or discretionary income, attracting the attention, the eyeballs and the punting dollar is paramount.
Yeah. 2 fewer meetings than last year in Victoria. This season going forward. So it's an interesting one to sort of see how those things have worked out, and it's getting that way of, I guess, doing it. The other thing, which is kind of leads to what Racing Queensland is like, where are racing bodies going to spend their discretionary money and how things are going to work? It was interesting. Racing Queensland announced this morning, Tim, that they've established what effectively is a training and education hub in at the Gold Coast, the Racing Institute. It's going to be called. So yes, interesting one that probably not surprising, Tim. We're seeing investment being put into retaining of skills within the industry and developing of skills within the industry.
I think it's, while PRAs are doing it tougher to, balance the books, maintain prize money and all the other costs they have to absorb, I think it's should be commended for investment in, and the government for investment in training, because such a labour-intensive industry to try and attract staff, train them up, jockeys particularly, but, stable hands, track riders, all that. Victoria's got the apprentice school. There's arguments maybe they should have more apprentices. I'm not well equipped enough to view one way or the other, but I think, good on Racing Queensland. I think Racing New South Wales supposedly has a building at Scone. I don't know how active that is at the moment, but I know there's plans there. Hopefully, that would be welcomed as well if that was sort of fully functional.
Yeah, there's often this discussion, I suppose, of having these sort of central racing sort of, I guess, learning places, what they call the new market model, to try to work through that. It's kind of interesting. I don't know. Maybe we spend a lot of time talking about the ideal of the English model. I think financially, Australia's in a much better place than what England is in terms of the way we return to things. So we need to think about what works for Australia, not necessarily would work for an overseas model. And this hub is a big step for RQ and a big step for the Gold Coast Turf Club. It'd be interesting to see how that develops. I wanted to point out a story which was written by Warwick Barr yesterday. I had a good chat with Darren Dance, who, after a long time working in syndication, nearly 30 years sort of across the board, had success with horses like Platelet, horses like Jackalbury and Heartbreak City, both went very close in Melbourne Cups. Darren's opted to sell his business and sort of basically, look, I guess there's a life cycle for a syndicator where they go through it. It's a lot of work to build up the business. He's done that. He's sold the business off elsewhere. He's done a really great job with the Australian thoroughbred bloodstock, but, time to move on. But it's an interesting article because it gives him time to reflect on, I guess we could talk about businesses, but these businesses are always driven on a dream, and his dream was to win a Melbourne Cup. He didn't manage to do that, but we've even seen that with like OTI winning big races, and they're a big syndicator, Star Thoroughbreds, all that sort of stuff. You can run them as a business as much you want. That's really important, but what you're selling is the racetrack dream, isn't it, Tim?
When Warwick, myself, and you, Bren, we've all interviewed Darren over the years as journos. Great to deal with, and I think he's perhaps been as unfair that he's flown under the radar, given he has run placings in Melbourne Cups and different thing.
One
But compared
Group
to
Ones, yeah.
some of the other syndicators, he's not front and centre, but he's just was very, very good at the game. Obviously had a lot of loyal clients. And the other interesting thing was his breeding sort of ventures and, buying mares in Europe, sending them to Frankels and Camelots and bringing them out to Australia. He's sort of probably ahead of his time, A, in syndication, and B, with breeding and that as well on a, syndication level, or, a few partners did it very well, widely respected. And the people at SCT syndications, I've dealt with them from a journalistic perspective as well over the time, and they were great to deal with and obviously do a good job with, John Foots, their bloodstock agent. So I'm sure Australian thoroughbred bloodstock and those sort of lime green colours will be seen for a fair while to come.
Indeed, it will be. Just the last one on interesting week for the VRC, who announced yesterday that one of the races, actually, Kylie Rogers, the CEO, will be at the Kentucky Derby this week, but one of the races on Kentucky Derby Day will now be a win in your in for the Empire Rose. I know, Tim, you've got some opinions about the validity of these win in your in races, and I've been well stated in that opinion. But it was an interesting week, the VRC, because they had some headaches around Anzac Day. Now, Kylie Rogers spoke to us last year and said public holiday racing is a bit of a trouble spot for the VRC to work where it is. They suddenly got to do, they suddenly got a cracking Melbourne autumn day on Anzac Day. They threw open the general admission and they got a 33% surge in the crowd, which led to greater demand on catering and other sort of services. And the VRC members weren't happy. One of our groups, or one of the groups that they're part of, was quite unhappy. And I guess it's a constant challenge trying to meet the expectations of patrons. But the VRC have got some challenges there to make sure that people are getting what they want out of it. Did take the point for the fact that they probably would have taken that 25-degree day at Stakes Day last year, Tim, when it was an absolutely horrendous Melbourne November day. But you can't predict these things. But public holiday racing is an interesting one because it fell on a Saturday, which it hadn't done since 2020, and before that 2015. Obviously 2020 we know was impacted by COVID lockdowns. So it's been a while since they've had a Saturday Anzac Day meeting. But I do think, these feature meetings are a really important part of the calendar, and it's important people get them right, because you get those, not once a year necessarily, but probably once an autumn sort of spectators going, oh, I'll go to the races today because it's Anzac Day and it's a public holiday, and I'm not going to footy because I can't get a seat or whatever else, and it's worthwhile to do. So I think they probably learned a few lessons out of that one, Tim.
Obviously clubs want people to come to the track, so they need to have a good time, otherwise they won't. So hopefully, I don't know how they came up with their metrics or ideas of how many the crowds they expected, but hopefully they've learned from it, and some of those people, disenchanted people, do come back because, as we know, racing, it is easy to sit at home and have a drink at home and bet on your phone than go to the track, although you can't beat that atmosphere in many cases anyway.
The following segment is brought to you by Inglis. A total of 11 supplementary entries have been confirmed for next week's Inglis Chairman's Sale, taking the final catalogue to 115 lots. The supplementaries are headed by this season's Group 2 Riesling Stakes winner Zhang, the dual Group Place filly Vestas, and two mares, Hazelbrook and Sizzlefly, in foal to Freak Stallion Extreme Choice. Other supplementaries include mares in foal to I'm Invincible, Harry Angel, and Stay Inside. The group performed mare Brigandine Gal and the 3-year-old Snitzel filly Southern Heiress. They join what is an exceptionally strong Chairman's catalogue that also features a Group 1 Goodwood Handicap winner Benedetta and triple Group 1 winner Provence, as well as Millionaire Mare Arabian Summer, among many others. The 2026 edition will be held at Riverside on Thursday, May 7th, continuing its Where Elegance Meets Excellence theme with a late afternoon start of 4 p.m. AEST. To view the Chairman's Sale catalogue, go to inglis.com.au. Finally, in wagering, and this probably links into our discussion about race day experiences. Obviously, you've got Wagga on this week, which is your hometown, and currently you'll be going to the races tomorrow on Friday, enjoying that race day experience. I'm going to Warrnambool next week, which is my former hometown, which I grew up in, to go and enjoy the 3 days of the Warrnambool Carnival while working as well. So, it's a hard life for some of us. What is notable about what those carnivals share, apart from usually a date and the first 2 letters of their name, is the book on-course bookmaker sort of vibe and the importance of that. And you've written an article about this week. You chatted to a couple of bookies, Tim, that sort of do the road warrior thing and go to Warrnambool and go to Wagga and go to these country carnivals. They are extremely important for the old school art of the bookies ring, aren't they?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's going to be 27. There is 27 bookies at Wagga, and I'm not sure how many at Warrnambool, New South Wales. I think it's a bit easier to get a spot than what it is at some of the Victorian rings, but that and probably Darwin and Swan Hill and a few other carnivals and things like that. They're punters' carnivals. People just turn up year after year, whether it's Warrnambool or Wagga. Usually they clash, but it is mostly about the punt and the Calcuttas at various pubs and different things like that, all trying to find a winner. And as Michael Byrne told me, a bookie, it's not a matter of just showing up and you win. It's, some good prices bet, lower percentages, but they have the opportunity to win, and same with the punters. And that's part of the thrill is, punter v bookie, like the old days, rather than, punter v your phone in some ways. Sort of that it is that connection. Warren Woodcock sort of referred to it as well. I spoke for that article, and he fielded at Deniliquin, but he also had stands at Flemington and Randwick last week, and he was at Deniliquin and held 12 grand and different type of, country people at a non-tab meeting.
Yeah, it was a really interesting yarn, Tim. It got me a little bit fired up, and maybe I'll go rather than destroy my phone battery with hitting the app next week at Warrnambool. Maybe I'll go to the ATM and get the old cash out and have a bit of a go. However, leading on to that, cash betting and I guess the way people bet and that sort of stuff very much under scrutiny this week, because we wrote an article last week which has been followed in other media outlets this week about Tabcorp banning 8 punters. We believe those punters were involved in retail betting around greyhound racing. Tabcorp insists that those bans are just things that they do regularly where people don't meet their anti-money laundering and know your customer requirements and all that type of stuff. So they're saying it's not but this is an issue, Tim. A, because of the prominence of one of the punters, which is Stephen Fletcher, which has been named in other outlets, but also because it speaks to this notion. There's a great suspicion that corporate bookmakers, banning punters under the pretense of AML and know your customer requirements when actually it's about winning punters. And look, we don't have a particular insight into whether this is the instance in this case, but the fact that the perception is out there is a negative for the industry, isn't it?
Obviously, as we've seen with Entain, the AML was hugely important, and obviously the bookies have to meet their obligations. But if they're using it to ban punters, whether they're big, small, or indifferent, it's not good for the industry in turnover time. And obviously the EBTs are an easier target to punt, and I've done it betting on Malaysia. It does. But that's part of running if you've got the retail monopoly, that should be the cost of doing business, is taking bets. And yes, sometimes you're going to get knocked off on a price, particularly when very few bookies are doing form. It's all, and I wrote about this only a few weeks ago, where it's basically one or two punters knocking the prices into shape, and one or two outlets, bookies doing the form to price something up, and it's very hard to price when there's hundreds of meetings, 3 codes around the country all the time. Sometimes you're going to get stung, and for Tabcorp to have, I think it's 3,700 retail outlets, you know, if those punters haven't done anything wrong, bad luck.
Yeah. Well, I said Tabcorp insists that it was all it's part of their usual procedures. We printed that statement. We sort of worked through that, but there's definitely a perception out there that there's something else sort of going on here. And regardless of that, I know Racing Victoria have said before that they're going to sort of, hold bookmakers to account on this stuff. And if they do use, these as excuses, then they'll be reported to AUSTRAC. Now, I've touched base with Racing Victoria to hear what sort of where that is. That was a couple of years ago to sort of see where they've gone with that. We'll get a response from them in the next couple of days. The other final one on wagering, Tim, is just interesting piece or sort of commentary from BetR's Andrew Menz this morning on their earnings call, just sort of talking about the impacts of the broader economy on wagering, and that wagering needs to know that it won't be immune. However, BetR are still very confident about where they sit, and their numbers, as they are reporting, look, they're saying they're pretty strong. They've got some desire to continue to grow and develop through organic growth. But I mean, it's to be expected, given that we're probably going to get an interest rate rise next week. We've got petrol prices are still higher than they were. We've still got uncertainty in the world. We've still got economic challenges, Tim, that people are going to have to cut their cloth and change the way they do. And that, for wagering, that generally means a downturn, doesn't it?
Yeah, just naturally, you've got your costs you have to meet, and punting is no one forces you to bet, so you have to cut costs and either scale down. It'd be interesting whether people are stopping betting altogether or they're just lowering their stakes. Would be an interesting thing. I think
Which is what he said. Which is pretty much
okay.
what Andrew Menz said. He said the same amount of people are betting, but they're lowering their stakes. And this is what we saw when turnover went down a couple of years ago too, Tim. It's just the nature of it. It's actually interesting. I was at the Warrnambool races 4 years ago when interest rates finally went back up after all that time of being suppressed. And now 4 years later, it's an interesting cycle. But anyway, we'll be back there next week. Yeah, hopefully contributing to sustaining the turnover of racing in Australia. Thanks for joining us, Tim. Thanks for joining us, everybody else. We appreciate your time. Of course, Straight Talk brought to you by our fabulous sponsors, Daly and Inglis. Don't forget to give us a rating where you're listening to us. Send us an email, editor@thestraight.com.au. Let us know what you think about what we're talking about. Anyone want to talk to, we'll be back again next week and we'll talk to you then.